Evolutionary.org Hardcore 2.0 coming your way. Today's episode 87. We're going to talk about best cycles to lean out with Para Pharma. So this is going to be a really interesting one. So Mobster and I, we're going to go over several different topics in this one. We're going to talk about leaning out strategies in 2024. Give you some ideas and some blueprints to having success at leaning out. We're going to talk about the different Para Pharma leaning out options. Now, they have many, but we've kind of cherry picked our top 10, 12 compounds that they sell. And we're going to talk about how, we're going to talk a little bit about what they are and how they work. Then we're going to have a little fun. We're going to talk about some different stacks. We're going to talk about a novice stack, an amateur stack, and an advanced stack using these Para Pharma products. So no matter what stage you are in your journey through steroids and bodybuilding and all this stuff, we're going to have a stack that you can try. We'll give you a couple stacks from each category, and you can go on Para Pharma and order them, and you can have some really, really good success, really be ahead of the game. So you don't have to keep experimenting with stacks and not getting the type of results that you were really hoping for, the prime results. Then we're going to finish out with talking about Para Pharma, the quality and the popularity, to give you an idea of how Para Pharma has been so good. So let's talk about leaning strategies first, Mobster. And, we're talking about the pre-show a little bit. We're talking about taking your time when it comes to leaning out. Talk about that.
Yeah, so something I said to Steve, and I don't want to make this sound like a criticism, and in fact, it just came on inspired by a conversation at the gym this morning before coming home to do this podcast, was there's an element sometimes of going straight to the shortcut. And of course, listen, right, Steve and I use PEDs. We understand the reason why we use PEDs. We understand the reason why we talk about PEDs in the show. And hopefully we've got a good idea from your feedback of our typical listener. But maybe it's outside of the forum, Steve, because we get to talk to people on the forums and then on these shows. So what I'm sometimes seeing outside of the forums is an element of probably because of the medicated society that we have in America, and to a lesser degree here in the UK, where we go straight to the drug, straight to the shortcut, and we're not putting in perhaps as much work as we want to. And that's because obviously sometimes dieting and doing cardio is hard. Of course it's hard. And of course you're busy, stressful society that we live in, etc., etc. But the reality of the situation is what worked before doing the cardio, what worked before cutting your calories, cleaning up your diet, taking the crap out of the larder and the freezer and the fridge that you know you're not supposed to eat, cutting back on the takeouts, cutting back on going out for food constantly, and eating as junk food and unhealthy food works. Cutting those things works. Okay, so I think one more thing, which is more to do with the time scale, which is perhaps what Steve Smith's talking about, is that if you leave it to the last minute, if you've got a holiday coming and you've only got 4 to 6 weeks to get ready, I'm kind of like, was the holiday a surprise gift? Did you win it in a competition? Because if you knew that you had the holiday coming, the thing that you wanted to get in shape for 12, 16 weeks ago, then 10 weeks ago, you could have started your cut. You could have started your lean out options. So that will mean lifestyle changes. So you've got to do some of the work, guys. And here's the thing as well, right? Let's imagine that some of the shortcuts, and this is some of the things we're going to talk about today, work. Of course they work. But the results you get, if you'd have done the work in the kitchen, if you'd have done the work, getting your steps in, rowing, riding a bike, whatever it is that you do for cardio, swimming, whatever, and you use the PEDs and you use our kind of tips that we're going to talk about, including fasting, then your results will be amazing by comparison. Quite simply, if Joe on the left does the work, cuts the food, cleans up his diet, and uses PEDs, he's going to have amazing results. But his brother John will have good results, but they won't be as good as Joe's, because he's not doing the cardio, because he's not cutting the food in the kitchen. What do you think on that, Steve, about the time scale and of doing some of the work that you need to do just to get the best results?
Yeah, and a lot of this has to do is as you get older, you start realizing this stuff. It's the old adage, and I mentioned this before on the forums and sometimes on the podcast, but I should mention it more, of the guy who went on the forum years ago, and he told me, he said, he's like, Steve, you can run a cycle and put on, 10 pounds, 12 pounds, or you can lose, all this body fat, whatever. And I said, look, let's, because we're talking about leaning out. Let me use leaning out for an example. Let's say you run a steroid cycle and you drop 2% body fat on the cycle. That's amazing. But a lot of people say, oh, that's not good results. But here's the thing, Rome wasn't built in a day, or whatever the cliche is, or Greece wasn't born in a day, whatever. So, you have to think more long term, because let's say you drop 2% body fat every cycle and you started out at 10% body fat. Well, that mean after 5 cycles you're at 0% body fat. Is that realistic? No, of course not. So what happens is each time as you're dropping body fat, it gets harder and harder and harder to lean out. So you have to have a more of a long-term view on this and understand that you're not always going to have you're not going to change your body overnight in most situations. We see people who do these transformations online on Instagram or whatever, or Facebook, and a lot of that is marketing. It's a coach trying to market you to get your money because they want to show off, wow, look, this happened to this client before and after. What they don't tell you is a lot of times those pictures are photoshopped. A lot of times what the person will do is they'll go 30 days, they'll go eat McDonald's, will stop working out, they'll just be a couch potato for a month. They'll actually purposely lose a lot of muscle, gain a lot of fat, and then the next 30 days they'll switch. They'll stop eating the junk food, they'll start using steroids, they'll be back in the gym, and you'll see this big transformation, where it wasn't necessarily that they had that big transformation. They did, but it was, what happened was you didn't see where they were before either. So they basically tapped into that body memory and they were able to get the results. So really, one of my tips here when it comes to strategies is don't worry what other people do on social media. Worry about yourself. Everybody's going to be a little different. We all have different genetics. This is not a cut dry black white this discussion when it comes to fitness. So we have to stop worrying about what people look like on Instagram and chase things that aren't necessarily attainable based on our genetics. So when it
Yeah,
comes to leaning out, I'll take a strategy from Mobster and I'll kind of add it, where
yeah,
you've
yeah,
got
yeah,
to
yeah.
just have a strategy, but be aware that it's not going to happen on one cycle, an 8-week cycle, a 10-week cycle, a 12-week cycle. It's going to be a lifelong battle and war to stay lean. And it doesn't get easier as you get older, because the way our bodies change, divorces, kids, loss of job, having to move. There's all kinds of things that get thrown out of way, deaths in the family, all of a sudden. So there's not going to be a situation where you're always going to be able to stay lean. There's going to be some times where you're going to have to take a break from training. You're going to get off course with your food and stuff like that. So you have to kind of take a long-term approach to this. That's what I would recommend. Go ahead,
Let,
Monster.
let me give you a couple of tips, if you like, strategies, as Steve said earlier on. So this one of them's a classic, and one's probably a little bit more modern. So the classic used to be, Steve, and I'd be a very good example of this. Now, I've done a cut, and we're going to talk about that later on in terms of one of the products that I've used. But let me give you an example. If I decide today, as we do this podcast, that I want to get leaner, I don't, but that might be something that I want to do in the future. What would be a good idea for me? And I've actually done something like this in the past when I've been training for my strength competitions. I've had no junk food in the house. I've had to, if I don't need to be specifically clean, I don't need a 6-pack to be stronger for the competitions I've done in the past. But equally, I was trying to do the thing, Steve, where everything that went in my mouth was functional. It was going to enhance my strength. So, a pack of Jaffa cakes isn't going to enhance my strength. Very nice, but not going to do me any favors. So if I wanted to get some junk food, I had to leave the house, go to the local supermarket, go to the local shops and buy it and bring it back and eat it, because I had a craving. If it was in the house, I'd eat it straight away. Where if it's in the shop, do I really want to go to the shop? So the trick here is, Steve, which is old school, is literally to clear out your cupboards. I've actually seen people in the past give away products they've got in the house. I've got all these biscuits, I've got this ice cream. I'm decided I want to diet. I don't want no temptation. Same thing with alcohol, fries, chips, whatever. Free to a good home. If you want it, I'll come around now, buddy. I'll take a box of that crap off of you. The kids and I will have that this weekend. It'll be a treat for us. Now you've got no crap in the house. One of the things that we talk about regularly is that we say, if you look at the people that are most likely to succeed on the forums, what do we see? The ones with the greatest level of success, as Steve and I agree on, is the ones that meal prep. And almost having a log on the forums keeps them on target. They almost feel obligated, Steve, to post photographs of how great the food is. Lean cuts of meat. Phil reminds me, he eats horse and other things. I've actually had horse. It's not the best, but you will see great pans, great trays of food that he's meal prepped, the whole week meal prepped. Other people doing the same, green veggies, healthy options, organic, the whole thing, right? So literally no junk food in the house. And a more modern one, Steve, and maybe even someone's actually got a filter for this on or an app on their phone. I'm sure it exists, is where you have a photograph taken of you now and the app reduces you down 20 pounds. It makes you look thinner. It makes you look leaner. I would be tempted in this day and age, Steve, to print that off and have it blown up, if it's at all possible, and stick it on the fridge and stick it in my training diary, stick it even one of our training logs on the forum. This is how I look now, and this is how I want to look at the end of this cycle, that at the end of this cut, that I want to get lean. This is how long I'm going to give myself, and in 10 weeks' time, I want to look something close to this. Now, what Steve's talking to is as an element of managing your expectations. And like I said, if you are 30% body fat and you lose 2% body fat, that's fantastic. You've actually done really, really well, but you're not going to see your abs. I saw one this morning, Steve, that I replied to, where the person was talking about 5 to 10 kilos, and he wanted to do that 3 times in the next 12 months. 30 kilograms at the top end is 66 pounds for you Americans. And the idea of adding 66 pounds of muscle, which is what he wanted to do, in a 12-month period was extremely unlikely. So it's a question of managing your expectations. So getting lean can be hard work. Getting fit and doing cardio can be hard work. And the idea that you should sort of say, oh, well, I'm going to drop 60 pounds or 80 pounds. No, manage your expectations. Whether it's a cycle or whether it's a diet, realistically, loads of us will lose lots of weight in the first week to 10 days. And then after that, even top professional, freaky genetic pro bodybuilders will tell you that the best, same as Weight Watchers, whatever else, is 1 to 2 pounds a week. You're managing your expectations. Don't leave it to the last minute. I'll come back to you, Steve, for we talk about fasting strategies, and I've got something else that I'm trying to think of right now that I want to tell the listeners and tell us another tip. Go on.
So no matter what, if you're a normal Joe or up to a pro bodybuilder winning Mr. Olympia, there are a couple of different strategies when it comes to leading out in 2024 that you should be doing that really work well. One is going to be fasted cardio. And we see, if you come on the forums, you look at the logs, the guys who are competing, the guys who are staying lean, they're getting bigger and they're getting leaner at the same time, which is really, really hard to do in bodybuilding. If you can achieve that, that takes a tremendous amount of effort and it takes a tremendous amount of willpower to do that. But the ones that are doing that, they're doing the fasted cardio. And when you do fasted cardio to start out your morning, your body is, you're waking up in the morning, for example, on a normal schedule, you ate maybe 6, 7 o'clock the night before. By the time you wake up in the morning, most of those glycogen stores are gone. So if you do cardio, you're going to burn through those excess glycogen stores really, really quickly. And now your body has to tap into what? They have to tap into fat. So what ends up happening is now you can see this when you piss on one of those ketone strips, you'll see some ketones coming out through your urination. And that means your body's expelling those fat cells. They're crushing those fat cells and expelling them, and it's showing up in those strips. So that would be the indicator that, yeah, I'm actually burning fat when I'm urinating, or sweating or whatever. It's actually, you're literally getting rid of the fat when you do the fasted cardio that way, versus waking up, eating refilling your glycogen stores, and then going and working out. Now your body has that fuel to burn through, and it's not going to even want to burn through the fat. Now, is this going to be comfortable for a lot of you out there? No, because we've been used to, in America, we've been brainwashed into waking up in the morning, eating a big breakfast, then going to work out. You got to have your breakfast, otherwise they've been advertising this in America for 50 years, right? Because the breakfast companies got to make their money. The cereal companies have to make their money. The farmers have to make their money. So my advice is stop eating breakfast. And one of the things that, will help you is it's not just because, okay, now you're getting less calories in the morning, but it's also from what I just said, now your body will run on the fat stores instead of be running on the food that you're consuming. So that's a great strategy right off the bat, is just do fasted cardio in the morning or just skip breakfast. The other thing is time restricted eating is important, or intermittent fasting. When you do that, you're able to keep your insulin levels low, and you're also able to keep your glucagon high, and that will put you in fat burning mode. So think of it this way: your body's either storing fat or burning fat. So if we're expelling more energies than we're getting in, yes, we're going to burn more fat, but it's not just about that. It's also hormonal, because if your insulin levels are higher, this is why pro bodybuilders inject insulin before their meals, because they want to partition those foods that they're eating to take advantage of those foods. So it's important to remember that when we're cutting, we want to keep insulin lower. And one of the strategies to do that would be to eat in a time restricted window. What I mean by that is you're going to eat, like, you can be like Mike Rashid, who we've done a podcast on, and eat one meal a day. You eat one meal a day, that means you're fasting 23 hours and you're only eating 1 hour. So during that 23 hours, your insulin levels are going to be very low. Your body's going to be, and your glucagon is going to be high. So you're going to be more in fat burning mode. You're going to also boost your insulin sensitivity, which will also help you burn more fat over time. So these are two different strategies that right now you can implement when it comes to leaning out. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in future podcasts, Mobster.
Yeah, let me give you another couple of
Yeah.
options, including the one I was trying to think of earlier on, right? So, number one, choose the best cardio for you, or rotate through your cardio options. It used to be the case a long time ago. So, we can talk about 2024 versus how it used to be. That pretty much your limitations years ago was one or two. If you ever see lean options, diets, strategies, etc. back in the day, oh, you're going to have to do this much running on a running machine. And that kind of seems to be still the case in people's mentality, Steve. If I see people, my local gym's got one of those heavyweight, I've forgotten what they're called, bicycles with a great big heavy flywheel at the front. They've got a ski type machine where, and I see people occasionally use that, but the four machines that they use the most is the running machine. And I think they've even got a row machine, but what you won't see is people rotating through those options on a regular basis. Or, and this is the other thing that I was getting at, using the cardio option that you can do. So, for example, and I'm an older gentleman, I don't struggle too much with wear and tear. I should do at this age, Stephen. I have had problems at one time or another, but I don't have any real long-term ongoing issues. But occasionally you'll come across people that have been athletes in the past and they might have a tweaky knee, for example. And so there's certain exercises, certain kinds of cardio that perhaps wouldn't suit them. And I go, okay, well then use a row machine. What about, oh, if I use the row machine and bending my knees? Well, actually you can just do upper body only. So, for example, instead of rowing a machine with your legs and your back, pulling it into your belly, you can keep your legs perfectly straight and just use your upper body. That's surprisingly effective. Second biggest group of muscles in your body by volume, by size, by weight is your back muscles, your quads, your glutes, etc. are your first. And so you're still going to burn quite a bit of calories just using your upper body on rows. So you can obviously row, you can use the running machine, you could use a bike, you could literally go out on an actual bike and ride around where you live, and so on and so forth. You could use a ski machine, you can even use those erg type machines, Steve, which are supposed to be absolutely brutal. I see an advert on Marketplace recently for a Jacob's ladder, which is essentially a conveyor belt with steps. You've got the Stairmaster itself. So there are multiple options, and most big gyms, most I wouldn't even call them hardcore gyms, but our hardcore gyms got 5 or 6 options. Some of the bigger gyms, Steve, have 5 or 6 different versions of the same kind of machine. So 5 different. They've even got those curved running machines. You've got the flat runners. You've got the ones where you can lift the front up and down, and so on and so forth. So you have so many options now. You can pick one that specifically works for you. You don't have to be stuck with the bike. You don't have to be stuck with the running machine. You have other options, and of course, as I'm saying, even if it's just a case of getting bored, Steve, swapping options in and out. Something else, and I actually expand a little bit on the fasted cardio that Steve talks about, but not necessarily fasted per se, but Steve said about starting the day fasted cardio in the morning. And what I'm thinking here, Steve, is get up early. And I know we've got stuff going on. You might have to go to bed another half hour early, Steve. Fine. You want to get in shape. You're going to make a little bit of a sacrifice here and get up half an hour early and do your cardio, even if it's just walking around the streets where you are, or riding your bike locally, or going to the gym early. My local gym's open at 6 or 6:30. You can go there for half an hour and do your cardio. Now, here's the reason for doing it in the morning, fasted or not, is you will actually speed up your metabolism. All exercise does this, but cardio especially, because that's what you're doing it for. And you're starting the day that way. And I think there's an argument to be made. It's actually, I would argue, Steve, it's probably more effective in terms of stimulus and metabolic effect for the whole day versus doing it late at night, which, for example, if it had that enhanced effect, might possibly keep you awake into the early wee hours, which we don't want you doing. What we want you to do is start your day right, get your cardio in. I think the argument for weight training, not necessarily cardio, is a slight increase in metabolic output. It's for about 4 hours. So it's quite a lot, obviously, during the workout, and then still stimulated to some small degree for an additional 3 hours after training. So there's a good example of that particular one. And something else, Steve, and I think this more ties in with societal habits, even, and you need to have this in your mind. You're only doing a lean out. You're not necessarily talking about changing your lifestyle, but I still would like you have this habit while you're leaning out. Do not, or try not to get into the habit of rewarding yourself with food. What do I mean by that? I will occasionally, for my own purposes, Steve, I've done this with food included, but try not to do it with food. And it might well be something like, I'll set myself a physical challenge, a weight that I want to lift in the gym. And if I do this epic lift, I'm going to buy that thing I saw on eBay. And that's kind of a mental reward. Now, I could buy the goddamn thing on eBay anyway, Steve. Of course I could, but I have to justify it to myself. But I'm justifying it in a way of, if I make this lift, if I get this poundage, if I do this number of reps, and it's normally something that's like a PB for me, Steve, then I'll do that. The reality of society now, Steve, and American, British society, European society, for a lot of our listeners, is that we reward ourselves with food. I've had a hard week at work, I'm going to have this bottle of wine. I've had a hard week at work, I'm going to have this pizza. And you need to get out of that habit, especially when you're doing a lean out. Do not have this relationship with food while you're trying to cut, while you're trying to get into shape, of rewarding yourself with a treat. What I might suggest in that particular example, in the same thing as what we call refeeds, you'll sometimes hear about competitive bodybuilders doing certain particular things during a cut, which is varying the amount of calories going in, but only by increasing the healthy food that you're normally eating. So, for example, if you're a professional bodybuilder, and we hear about chicken and rice and fish and rice and the various foods that they will occasionally eat, what they might do temporarily for a day on a so-called refeed is up the amount of fish and rice or chicken and rice. What they're not doing is having a bag of donuts. What they're not doing is going down to the 7-Eleven and raiding the Baskin-Robbins fridge. They're not doing that on a refeed, and they shouldn't do that on a refeed, because you can easily put 1,000 calories of junk food away very, very quickly in an hour, Steve. One pizza, 1,000 calories. Ben and Jerry's, which I like, 1,000 calories, 500 mil, 1,000 calories. Half a pint is 1,000, more or less 1,000 calories if it's the full fat option. And that is so easy to do and very, very quick to eat. And you're literally going to have to do 4 or 5 hours of cardio minimum just to make up for that sort of splurge. It's a lot easier or healthier or better to increase the amount of healthy food temporarily by 400 or 500 calories, but it's more rice, it's more chicken, it's more fresh vegetables, it's more organic food, and you're still getting the vitamins and minerals, you're still getting the increased protein and carbs, but they're clean carbs, they're clean protein. So if you, and that again would be for a refeed. I would say try to avoid the psychological, societal relationship that we sometimes have, and even adverts used to do this, Steve. Was you deserve it, and it'd be for like a fantastic bar of chocolate. And adverts back in the 80s and 90s used to do that kind of stuff all the time. So try to avoid that rewarding relationship with food for the purpose of you getting lean, for the purpose of you getting cut. Have a functional relationship with your food. I'm eating this because it's good for me, and I'm eating this because what I want, which is to look amazing, have a brilliant six pack, be in the best shape of my life, is what I'm doing this for. What do you think on that, Steve, before we move on?
Yeah, we see the kid all the time crying at Disney, they're with their parents, and then the parents, what do? They're just like, oh, I'm so sick of this. And then they go to the little ice cream cart and they buy the kid the little Mickey Mouse ice cream and they shove it in their mouth and it shuts the kid up. So we've been kind of trained from when we were kids, when we feel, a certain way, we're tired at Disney. It's hot. We're just sick of this. And our parents shove food down our throats just to shut us up. So a lot of us were raised like that. I know your generation was, Mobster, because a previous generation to you didn't have much food. So
For
you
sure,
guys,
man. For
yeah, you
sure.
guys were the consumer generation. And then me, Generation X, same thing. We were the TV generation. So we watch TV and watch. So really, you're talking about a 6 or 7 second dopamine rush with food. So also what bothers me a lot is people who say, oh, I want a treat, oh, I just want to reward myself. When you start eating healthy, you start craving healthy foods. I crave things like nuts, fruits, veggies, good quality meats. That's what I crave. I don't crave the junk food. The junk food makes me sick. If someone comes to my house and they got a bag of McDonald's, I don't even let them bring that in my house. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm going to get a cooler for you for the garage and you can keep it in the garage. I don't even want to smell it because it makes me nauseous, even though I used to eat that stuff back when I was in college. But, good quality food, once you start getting used to eating good quality food, you'll crave good quality food. So it's about, if you're this person, you're addicted to the fast food, trust me, when you stop eating it for like 2 or 3 weeks, your cravings will go away and you won't crave it again. So don't get in that habit of, oh, I'm just gonna have one cheat meal a week. Well, you can eat good quality food. Come on my log or come on anyone else's log on forum who's making their own meals and look at the delicious food that we're making, and it's healthy. So you can eat delicious food and have it be healthy at the same time. So it's about food prepping, as Monster said earlier. That's going to be the key here, because if you're not going to be able to put good quality food in your body, you're just not going to have an optimal body to cut and lean out. So we'll talk about this a lot more in future podcasts. Mobster and I have a lot more to share, but we got to get into the ParaPharma leaning out options, Mobster. So let's start with the orals. They have an Anavar 10, Anavar 50 milligrams. So this is great whether you're male or female, because females can use Anavar no problem. And then Turinabol at 20. So look, I've used both of these. I have a lot of respect for both of these. They're both mild steroids. Even though they have liver toxicity with them, they're 17 alpha alkylated, they're still mild in the body where they won't cause a lot of side effects. They won't cause water retention. They're DHT derivatives. So these are good for leaning. You can take these and exercise on them. Now, Anavar does come with pumps. So if you're doing very intense exercise, Anavar is going to be a little bit of a problem. But Turinabol won't. Turinabol is great if you like to go and do a lot of cardio, you like to go jogging, you like to do kayaking, swimming, whatever. Turinabol is perfect for you. So if you're a male, Anavar, look, 25 to 50 milligrams a day of Anavar will work perfectly well. Turinabol, 20 to 40 milligrams a day would be perfectly well for a male. For females, I would go 10 milligrams, up to 10 milligrams of the Anavar, somewhere between 2.5 and 10 milligrams. And then
Yeah.
if you're a female with the Turinabol, I would go about 5 milligrams on the Turinabol. Maybe you can go up to 7.5 milligrams. So those would be good options when it comes to orals. And if you want to do them and do the time restricted eating, as I talked about earlier, the fasted cardio, they work perfectly for that as well. And you'll start noticing more vascularity, more hardness, and more cutting when you're using them. Mobster, how do you like them?
Yeah, I mean, as Steve knows, Anavar is one of my favourites for power, and in fact, I've for women, one of the things that we will sometimes see, and I agree 100% with the dosage numbers that Steve talks about, 2.5 milligrams and up. And in fact, again, ironically, Steve, we are just talking about that at the gym again this morning before coming back during the fat after the workout. And yeah, so one of the things we will suggest is a lot of products. For example, ParaPharma have both 10 and 15 milligram. The 10 would be for me the way to dose it through the day, and definitely an option for the women that are listening. And buy a pill splitter, just because. And the other thing, don't obsess too much, because we have seen this once or twice, where one bit of the pill was bigger than the other bit of the pill. It doesn't really matter. It's a very small thing over the dose of the day. And again, we're talking about the safest options here for you to use. Something in regards to Tyranobol, which I've agreed with in the past with Steve as well, is certain of the following injectables that we might be talking about. One specifically stands out in terms of the trend and the trend options and products with trend included would be that it enables you to on trend will fuck your cardio, and whatever cardiovascular activity you're doing will be impacted by the use of trend. And to some degree, Cyrinabol will enable it to have less of an impact. It will still have some kind of impact. It will be that much harder for you to get your steps in, or that much harder for you to ride the bike than normally, because you're using trend. In the same way that Anavar will give you those horrible pumps that will make certain kinds of cardiovascular activity difficult. And in this case, the Tyranobol is actually going to mitigate that somewhat. In fact, specifically designed for that particular reason, Steve. So yeah, I mean, it will also work quite well with anything else, but it has that particular impact on the trend. So let's talk about novice stacks here, Steve, in terms of just injectables, for example. And I'm looking here, and this will also depend on just how lean you start out at. So, for example, if you're 30% body fat and you reduce it to 20, Mastron might not be as effective as you would like it to be. It can impact a little bit, and we're going to mention it why, on helping you reduce body fat. But the number one reason for us using it is hardening. But let's start with the first one here, Steve. Bolderone, which of course is EQ. So they do a Boldo 300, and they also do a Bolderone or Boldo 500. So that's EQ in a 300 milligram per mil and EQ in a 500 milligram per mil. How would you use those, Steve? And I'm thinking in terms of a novice stack using Bolderone, 300 milligrams, especially if you've never used Masteron. What would you run that with? Some kind of test? An obvious example here, Steve, would it be a testcipionate or a testosterone, and they do those as well. And running that with Bolderone, I would probably go dose testosterone at 250 milligrams twice a week.
Well, yeah. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the individual steroid first, so we don't
Yeah. Okay.
confuse
Yeah.
people before
Yeah.
we stack. So yeah, they have a Boldo 300 and they have a 500. And of course, it is equipoise, as Mobster mentioned. And look, this is one that's used in horse racing. We all know that. Originally, it was used in human grade, so it's not a vet steroid originally, but it is used in veterinary medicine today. And look, racehorses use it for a reason. It has lower side effects. It's mild. It's a testosterone derivative, but they took away the aromatization and they took away a lot of the androgenic side effects that come with testosterone. So with Boldone, it comes in 300 and 500. So as a male, you can do 1 cc a week, where it get you at 300 milligrams or 500 milligrams. And you got to keep in mind, because it is a testosterone derivative, it is going to increase your appetite a little bit, especially if you run at a higher dose. And that comes with the territory, because you're working out, you're burning more calories, and then it's speeding up your metabolism. So it's going to give you a little more hunger. But at the same time, it's great for cutting. And I'll tell you why. Because if you want to run like a cardio-centric type of cycle,
Yeah.
equipoise is amazing. And it's not just because it's used in horse racing, I say that. And horses obviously love it for that reason. They're probably telling They're trainers, hit me with some of this EQ, baby. I want to beat the shit out of this horse next to me,
Yeah.
But look, at the end of the day, I've used equipoise, and it seriously will actually help me when it comes to cardio. It makes cardio easier. Part of the reason it does is the combination of factors. It's boosting your red blood cells, which obviously help. That's why they do that in blood doping. They blood dope when it comes to endurance for a reason, but it also doesn't come with the side effects of the water retention. So instead of using testosterone, which also increases red blood cells, use the equipoise, which won't add water retention. So imagine just carrying a gallon of water while you're running, how much harder it would be to run. Well, that's what happens when you use testosterone and then you want to do a lot of cardio, especially at moderate dosing. So with equipoise, you don't have to worry about that. So that's one of the reasons why equipoise is such a good option for cutting.
It's
It's
probably
just
the number one cutter, Steve, don't you think?
from
In terms
injectable.
of
Well, it's a number one. No, not with cutting, but with cardio. Like if you want to do a cycle where you're doing a lot of cardio and you need something for cardio, it's going to be the best option. It's not going to give you those crippling humps. So it's a really good option. We'll talk about it when we talk about the stacks, different ways you can stack it. But yeah, if you're a person, guy or gal, and you just want to go and do fucking cardio to burn a lot of calories, right? And do a lot of fasted cardio, equipoise is the one that I would recommend. I wouldn't dare use most of these that we're going to talk about for that purpose, because they will just cripple you when it comes to cardio. But there are better options for hardening and cutting and stuff like that. So we're gonna get
yes.
into that next. So let's talk about the Cut Stack 150, which is an option from ParaPharma. It's a very popular option.
Yeah. Now I've
Mobster,
used this, as Steve knows.
so
I've used
Mobster
this
is gonna
product. Yeah.
talk about his, but let me talk about first what's in it so you guys understand. It's got
Yep.
test probe, it's got tren acetate, and it's got masteron probe. So it's got short esters of masteron, tren, and testosterone. So this is a good one for short cycle. You want to do a short cycle.
Yep.
And this one, look, if you are a good reactor to these steroids, okay, you will literally keep everything the same and you will shred up on this stack. We've seen this. I've seen guys even with horrible diets shred up on this type of blend. So Cut Stack 150 would be one to try more later on as you get more advanced. But look, at the end of the day, it's a good option if you just want to do 50 milligrams of each per cc. So Mobster, talk about your experience with it.
Yeah. So I recomposition like a motherfucker on this product. I was using 2 mil, so 300 milligrams total of the combination. 2 to 3 times a week, Steve. So between 600 and 900 milligrams. I think it was just under 900 milligrams, if I remember rightly. And I recomposition like a motherfucker. So what does recomposition mean? Typically holding on to, or indeed arguably even building a little bit of muscle, and at the same time reducing body fat. Now I did increase my daily quota of steps by one, I think it was one half. So I was, instead of 6,000, become 9,000, 3 lots of steps per day, Steve. And I definitely cleaned my diet up. Now I wasn't sort of fasting, I didn't go crazy or whatever else. And I believe at the time I started at 327 and a half, went down to 320, and went back up to, and this is all as Steve said, in a short period of time, 4 weeks, to 327 and a half. But as I've mentioned on other shows, my belt size went down 2 notches on my weightlifting belt and stayed there. And even now, I haven't had to adjust that belt back up, Steve. And just to give people an indication of how successful that was. So 4 weeks, increased my cardio, cleaned up my diet, and went down 2 notches on my belt. So my waist went down, just to give you sort of an idea of how that worked. And I considered the cycle on that particular product successful. However, like Steve says, short testosterones are not necessarily for everybody. They can be, for example, post-injection pain in some users, although most companies, including ParaPharma, have got a lot better at managing that. And the tren. I did feel the effects of tren, Steve. Doing that last batch of cardio every day was a giant pain in the ass in terms of sort of my sensation and mood and whatever else. And there was always, for me, in terms of being arguably tren sensitive, that slight sensation of being ever so slightly toxic, slightly, and I mean slightly out of sorts. It wasn't horrible. It was manageable. It didn't fuck with my night. Didn't give me horrible sweats or whatever else. I don't think I was dosing it high enough for that, but I did notice that slight sensation of feeling slightly out of sorts, slightly toxic in terms of my response to trend. So it's not for everybody. But in terms of whether it was effective or not, absolutely. So yeah, for me, Steve, honestly, again, dosaging for me, I was running 2 mil 3 times a week. It's worked out to a fraction under 900 milligrams total. That's relatively high for me. But again, I was only running this for 4 weeks, Steve. So if I can't handle trend at a relatively low dose for 4 weeks, what the fuck am I doing? For most users, Steve, again, it's a shorter rest at 1 to 2 mil 3 times, I think would be absolutely perfect. And the only reason I would say 3 times a week is because it's a shorter resters. And the one, again, if you've not used this product, if you're not used to train, if you're not used to shorter resters, the 1 mil 3 times a week is perfect. That'd be only total 450 milligrams, but it is quite effective when in combination with the cardio and everything else. And then 1.5 mil to 2 mil if you have used trend, if you are used to shorter resters for the more advanced, Steve. So moving on to the next product, which is they do a masto enanthate, Steve, in the E2 or masto E200, and they do a masto propionate, which is called the masto P100. And as I mentioned earlier on, Masteron is arguably probably the best hardener, and it does get included in a lot of lean out cutting type stacks. The only argument, and I've said against this before, is if you are carrying a lot of body fat, and I was going to say morbidly obese, but if you're carrying a lot of body fat and you reduce as you're doing a diet, as you're doing a cardio to a lesser body fat, you're not suddenly going to, the hardening effects won't be visible. If you are lean and you reduce down even further, let's say, for example, Steve, 15%, maybe as low as 12%, and you reduce down to sub 10%, not only are your abs going to pop, but that hardness can almost be visible, not just in the sensation of how your muscles feel, but literally you will see an effect on the more advanced, the leaner, especially when it's 5 and 6% body fat. There's almost a visual kind of sense of hardness just to the appearance of the muscle. And you will notice this if you'll see the difference between a muscular person and a competing bodybuilder, the graininess, the gnarliness. And this is where I think Masteron really, really shines. It can be something that helps you get lean, but again, the hardening effects you will not see, even if you drop 5% body fat, say you're 18% and you get down to 13%, you're not really going to see your abs until you get around the 10%, and you're not really going to see the visual effects that Masteron are going to benefit from you. In terms of running this, my preference would be for the Masto E200, Steve. And again, I'm thinking probably around, and if I was running it solo, which I wouldn't, I would probably be looking at 600 milligrams. So that would be 300 milligrams twice a week, so 1.5 million. And I'd probably run that with some other kind of testosterone. Again, perhaps testo E250 enanthate and so on and so forth. And those are nice, easy, relatively not a problem cycle. We have seen, this would probably be more for the advanced users, as high as, and it completely depends on what else you use, but advanced users do tend to sort of be going with the higher dosages, even up to 800, 900, and even around 1,000 milligrams. What do you think on that, Steve, before we start talking about Primo?
Yeah, best hardener on the planet. I talked about it previously. I was on Masteron. I think I was on 500 milligrams a week, and I was getting a massage, and the massage lady said that my muscles were the hardest she's ever experienced before. She said it was, she was just blown away by how hard my muscles were. So keep that in mind when you're using it. So the next one, let's get into, and look, a dosage of 200 to 600 milligrams a week is fine. Professionals will use much higher dosing. They love Masteron, especially going into a show. But as Mobster said, make sure your body fat is low. You can't harden body fat, obviously, but you can harden muscle. So if your muscles are covered up by body fat, there really is no point. Next one we're talking about is Primo, and ParaPharma has a Primo 100. It's really good quality. It's an enanthate ester. And one of the things you want when it comes to Primo is a mild effect. It's one of those that's very mild, very slow. and you can run anywhere from 300 to 600 milligrams a week. This is great for bodybuilders who like high repetition training. So if you want to lean out and do high repetition training and a lot of, slow cardio, like, you like to just go on the treadmill or elliptical for 60 minutes, Primo would be a good option for you. You can eat in a deficit when you're on Primo. It won't fuck with your appetite like some of these other injectables that we talked about. So Primo is one of the classic ones. This was Arnold's favorite steroid back in your day, Mobster. Talk about Primo a little bit, and then we'll get into the next one.
Yeah, so we're seeing a rise in the popularity in modern times in 2024 with Prima Bowling. And this is the reason, and the reason, of course, why Arnold and other bodybuilders of his era were using it. Now, they didn't have a lot of options back then, so that doesn't particularly apply. But what the truth was, the limited options that they did have, which included Primo was used specifically because they would be bulking in the off season, getting as big as a house and doing all the big compound exercises and trying to add another 3, 4, 5 pounds of muscle in the off season. But they were carrying a little bit of body fat. Now, modern bodybuilders shouldn't allow themselves to get out of shape. But again, we're talking to the average Joes that listen to this show, as well as people that compete. And the reason why it worked then and would work now, Steve, is that when you are doing a cut, where you are leaning out, using ParaPharma products, what you want to do is you want to hold on to that hard-earned muscle tissue. You want to lose body fat. It's typical, Steve, as you know, if you bulk up, you add muscle, but you also add a bit of fat. And if you cut fat, but you might lose a bit of muscle. And so Primo Bowling shines in this particular regard because it's kind of mild in terms of its anabolic effect. You're not going to put on 5 or 10 pounds. Most users using Primo, even at a moderate to high dosage, is going to be 3 pounds, 4 pounds, and that's not a lot. It's but 10 pounds of muscle you'll notice. It's an inch all over the average person. 3, 4 pounds, you might see what's going on, but where it shines, Steve, is retention of that muscle. So you want to lose body fat, you want to get leaner, you don't want to lose muscle, and Primo helps you hold on to that muscle. And that's the reasons why Arnold and his lot were using it, and it's precisely why, especially with the lifestyles and the options for cardio that we discussed earlier on, and the way that people train and eat and use steroids now, Primo seems to be making something of a comeback. You're starting to see it used more and more in people's stacks. And again, something that Steve touched upon, I've touched upon, you're also going to see it to some degree in competitive stacks. In terms of dosing, we're talking about 100 milligram product here. And again, it would not be used on its own. It's almost certainly going to be part, and I'm talking about the higher dosages here, Steve. 300, 400 milligrams might be a higher dosage, but it would be part of an overall stack. It would be part of multiple combinations of steroids. And that's what you're typically looking at with a competing bodybuilder is the bulking type drugs at the beginning, uh, products that are allowing you to get cut in the middle, and products that are allowing you to retain muscle and really begin to shine and get that gnarly look, get the harder and look like we mentioned with the Mastron towards the end of the cycle. And also what you'll typically see is the longer rests at the beginning, say 16 to 20 weeks out, and much shorter rests at the end. So in this case, for example, Steve, you're talking about an enam fate, so it's going to be a medium to longer rester versus, say, for example, an ace or a prop. But again, very, very, very mild effects. You shouldn't see too much in the way of water retention and so on and so forth. What do you think on the dosage, Steve, before we move on to the next product?
Yeah, so 300 to 600 milligrams a week, high repetition training, that would be your best option with Primo. Now let's move on to ParaPharma. They have several different testosterone options. They have SIP, they have E, they have a Testo E400, they have a Test Pro, so they get you covered across the board. It's going to be
Yes.
dependent on how often you want to inject and all that stuff. But look, testosterone can help you cut in certain situations. Some of you out there are going to react well to it. Some of you won't. If you've got low testosterone and you go on a little bit of testosterone, for example, you'll be able to cut easier, in my opinion, because you've got low testosterone to begin with, and that's making it harder for you to cut. You see what I'm saying? So it's important to remember the effects it has on water retention. So it could definitely backfire. And most of you aren't going to want to use testosterone in a cut, but some of you like a little bit of it in your cycle as a base. So it just depends on the individuals. So at the end of the day, I think we can all agree keeping your testosterone levels at a low dose is going to be important. Um,
Yeah, I'm also
yeah.
thinking, Steve, just, and I mentioned it with the competitive cycles, the test prop, for example, probably be what may be the choice simply because it's a P100 prop 100. It's a lower dose. So again, and it's also shorter in and shorter out in terms of its half life in the body. So they're giving you options to go with a test that you like, the one that works for you, and of course, the different esters so that you can take it in and out of the cycle either slower or quicker. So just in terms of that one. The next one, Steve, has to be probably the daddy, and arguably because of the recomposition effects, never mind the leaning out effects, and that would be trembolone. I'll talk about the what ParaPharma offers, and then I'll let Steve jump in with some sort of suggested dosages and ways to stack it. So they do a Trembo A100, which is Trembolone ACE or acetate, Trembo E200, so Trembolone enanthate. They do a Tren mix called 350, which is Tren enanthate in 100 milligram form and the testosterone enanthate in 250 milligram form. And funny enough, Steve, again, that last one with the testosterone, whether we'd include it or not, how would you use Tren on a lean out, Steve, and what would you combine it with?
So if you're new to trend, 200 to 250 milligrams a week would be a good way to start with it. But some guys will run up to 400 milligrams a week. I've run it all those dosing. 400 was just too much side effects. So you're going to be have to be aware with trend has a lot of side effects. And trend, you know, I've seen different transformations on trend, even with guys who diet who hasn't been that good. They've been able to really shred up on trend. Keep in mind with trend cardio, it's going to get absolutely blown out of the water. So if you want to do a cut where you're depending a lot on cardio, tren ain't it. All right. You're going to have to pick something else. If you want to just hit the gym and grind through a cycle, then tren is the one for you if you want to try something really, really hardcore. But the side effects with tren are definitely something you need to be aware of, and they will be really, really rough on you. So keep that in mind. So two more we're gonna do. These aren't steroids; these are actually drugs. T3, 25 micrograms. And T3 is a thyroid medication. It's given to people who have very, very slow thyroids as they get older. A lot of women, middle-aged women, for example, get put on thyroid medication. But we see this in bodybuilding. I don't like messing around with the thyroid. I've used T3 before. I didn't see much out of it. I think there's better ways to boost your metabolism than using thyroid medication. So you just want to be aware of that. But if you do want to experiment with it, don't do it for a long period of time. Do it for maybe 4 weeks and then come off. You're going to want to run probably 50 micrograms a day of T3, and that would be a good dosage for you. Now, professional bodybuilders, it's a different situation because they're on so much stuff that they'll add the T3 just to boost their metabolism in itself. So, and Clen, same thing with Clen. I've used it before, but I'm not a fan of it. It comes with a lot of
Yeah.
side effects. It can enlarge your heart. It will make you very jittery. It will destroy your cardio. And that's the way it helps you burn fat, is that it makes any type of exercise more tough. So let's say you like after the gym, this is what I used to do. I used to on the way home from the gym, I used to stop at this little school, the school which had a track. So I park my car there and I go there and do a couple laps around just to get in some cardio. I didn't like doing treadmill. And when I was on clean, when I would do a couple laps around, I mean, when I was on cleanse, it would be really nasty. Like I'd be in a sweat, I'd be
Mm,
like shaking, my heart
mm.
rate would be elevated. So it makes exercise harder so that you burn more calories in the process. Just a nasty way to to burn fat. And I don't like it. It's not effective because what happens is it actually does the opposite of T3. It actually slows your metabolism in the process because it's making it so much harder for you to exercise. So when you come off of it, a lot of people just rebound with the body fat that they lost while on it. So there's better ways, in my opinion. But some people, Mobster, I'd say 10 or 20% of people will react really well to Clen, and a lot of
Yes.
pros like to use Clen. So with Clen, the way you use it, before I let you in, um,
Yeah.
you could start out with the 40 micrograms, which is one pill, and then you can work your way up to 60 to 80 to 100 to 120 to 140.
Yeah.
And then once you get to a certain level where you're getting a lot of side effects, you want to back off a little bit. So come back down 20 micrograms and then stay there for like 2 weeks and then exercise as much as you can. And you will, in theory, burn a ton of calories and that will help you lose body fat. So that'd be the way to use it if you want to experiment with it. But it's a nasty, nasty drug to use. I personally don't like it, but like I said, some people react really well to it.
Yeah, my only issue, Steve, is, and I said this on previous shows for listeners' benefit, is I've seen in person people come to the local gym, ask about thyroid products, ask about specifically Cren, but thyroid products as well, and they don't understand how these products are going to make them feel. They want and we touched upon this right at the beginning of the show. Listen, all PEDs are shortcuts. All PEDs enhance what you're doing. And I'm not going to be down on steroids and then say, oh, but this is okay. It makes no sense. Everything comes with the potential for side effects. The issue for me is thus. I see people that have come in person, as I said, asking about these products, going away and using them, and they're making no lifestyle changes. They're still sitting on the sofa watching TV over night time. They're still eating chips. They're still eating junk, and they're wanting the drugs to do all the work. And then the other issue, which is just as much as what Steve talked about, is the side effects. Or if I'm not even going to say side effects, Steve, because I kind of think that's how you're supposed to feel when you're using these. So literally, they get the sensation, and especially if you're sensitive to anxiety and you have anxiety issues, you feel like you're having an anxiety attack. You feel like you're anxious when they're on them. And to be honest with you, Steve, that's what you're supposed to feel like. That's literally the effect the drug's having on your body, and that's how it's increasing your metabolism. That's how it's allowing you to burn body fat and so on and so forth. So, if you're taking it, you should understand that's what's going to happen, and you should realize that you're not having an anxiety attack, you're not freaking out, you are literally feeling the effects of the drug. And then, as Steve said, it may well be that they're also going in to a higher of a dosage and they need to manipulate the dosage. But obviously, if they make lifestyle changes, they'll see a greater effect. I want to talk now, Steve, about ParaPharma, purely and simply because, as you know, listeners, we discuss why we like certain companies. We discuss why we talk about their particular products. For example, Steve, as I'm doing this show with you right now, I'm looking at their page. And on the very top of their page, something I like to see all the time is a lab test tab. They've also got an era supplier check. Some companies won't post lab tests, and you ask yourself why. You can ask them, and sometimes they'll send you a lab test. But I want to see this stuff as part of a company's setup. If you know that your products are good to go, you will post lab tests. You will have them there and they're available. If it's a little bit old, Steve, contact them and ask for an up-to-date one. So that's the go. I know, for example, Steve, that we talked about this on other shows, but specifically with ParaPharma, I've used ParaPharma products. Steve's used ParaPharma products. We got users on the forum right now that you listeners can come and check, not just what we're saying as we do this show, but you can go onto the forum. You can use the search option, put ParaPharma into the search option, and you will find training logs where people right now, as we do this show, and as you come on and listen, whether it's tomorrow or in a month's time, you will find a user on there using a ParaPharma product, and guarantee you that 9 times out of 10, Steve, the results will be amazing because they're putting in the work, the diet's good, but also because they're using ParaPharma products. And then, like I said, we can look at lab tests here. We know that products have been independently tested. Even the supplier check thing, Steve, is it a legitimate ParaPharma product you're getting from someone? I know where my product came from. I know who supplies it. I know that they are a supplier, a supplier that's working with ParaPharma to supply their product. So I know that. And I said, let me talk about the independent testing. Another thing, Steve, for example, the way that their products were presented. I've literally, in the past, been directed to and gone to a website where the fucking labels were wonky on the pictures of the products that this particular company was selling. Sorry, I'm supposed to think that your product's a good product, and you couldn't even be bothered to straighten a fucking label for me to look at as a way for you to present your products. You've just literally taken what's coming, left the label as it was, and posted that image. I mean, come on. If you're not making your products look professional, if you're not putting out lab tests, if you've not got people, like I said, myself and Steve and others, who have run and tried those products and had results from those products, then you're just not worth looking at. You really are. And then, like I said, in regards to, we talk about this all the time, Steve, ParaPharma is included in the list of companies that we've suggested in the past were tested independently by a member of the forum using his own money, at his own expense, and in his own time, sent off 10 different products from different suppliers, including ParaPharma, sources that we talk about all the time, and had them all tested. And in his own words, which Steve and I have both quoted on different shows, he expected, not wanted, he expected at least 2. These were the words he said. I thought 2 would fail. I thought I'd get an 8 out of 10 hit. And they all passed, ParaPharma included. Now, I've touched upon just before we finish this, so Steve, that there's an expectation, an actual legal allowance in the industry for pharmaceutical products of how much they're allowed to deviate by in terms of, are they 200 milligrams of a painkiller or an anti-inflammatory or whatever else, and they're allowed to be a little bit one side and a little bit the other side. And in fact, here's how crazy this was. Every single one of the approved sources, including ParaPharma that were tested, were all closer to the exact dosage that they were supposed to be than the allowance that's allowed in the pharmaceutical industry. I believe, Steve, you're talking about, I think it's 5, might be 20%, but I'm still going to say 5%. And every single one of the products were 97, 98, and 99% dosed. And that was better than the allowance that's in the big pharmaceutical industry allowance, just to give you an idea of how good they are. If you want to have more options on higher stacks and pro stacks and hardcore stacks, etc., of any of the products that we've discussed today, please come onto the forums. I'm sure that we'll do more shows on ParaPharma stacks and cut options in the future, and we'll talk about some of the kind of crazy dosages that the top professionals are using as well. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Come onto the forums, ask us questions about the products we discussed today. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic, a podcast of informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.